If you're watching this on YouTube, you might have noticed that this episode is a week delayed. But if you want to get early access to our episodes, consider becoming a paying member. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with your friends. Thank you for all your support. The Richard Dawkins Foundation, although mainly active in America, also has a flourishing branch in Germany. They develop resources to help children with scientific and critical thinking. They frequently publish German translations of scientific and skeptical articles, and they put on events in various German cities. One of these events was a conversation between Michael Shermer and me in Berlin in 2018, chaired by Jörg Elber. Michael Shermer is the publisher and editor of Skeptic, a fine magazine of scientific rationality. He's an excellent and prolific writer, author of many popular books, including Why People Believe Weird Things, The Moral Arc, and a biography of Alfred Wallace called In Darwin's Shadow. He was a columnist on Scientific American when that magazine still had a high reputation among scientists. I regard him as a good friend. I hope you enjoy this good-humored conversation between Michael and me as much as I did at the time. It was a wide-ranging discussion, followed by questions from the audience.
Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Michael Shermer and Richard Dawkins.
Wow, thank you for that warm reception, mostly for Richard, I suspect. Hang on. But I'm glad to be here too. So I thought, Richard, we might cover the span of religion and science, and then morality and science, and then maybe seg a little bit into politics and related to both terrorism, what's the real cause of it, religion, politics, both or whatever, and then maybe wrap up with some of the recent campus craziness about postmodernism and what's truth and that sort of thing. So starting on a positive note, as you know, there's been a huge growth of the nuns, the so-called people that tick the box for no religious affiliation. You guys don't have this problem in Germany, but you went through this already long ago. But in America, it's now about 25% of all Americans have no religion. About 33% of millennials, those born after 1981, and it could be close to 50% of iGeners, that is, kids born after 1995. So now you're probably familiar with Stein's law that trends that can't go on forever won't. But on the other hand, at least in large part to your work and that of the atheist movement, can you foresee a day when, say, in England and in the United States, when we could get to 80%, 90% nuns, and also we should distinguish that when they tick the box for no religious affiliation, that doesn't necessarily mean they're atheists.
That's true.
They may be followers of Deepak Chopra, or they think there's a force in the universe or the secret, and they just have to ask the
There's
universe.
got to be something out there.
There's something, yeah.
Yes, I think in German you probably don't have the same problem that we have with nun being confused with nun. I have a friend who was in hospital, and she was in bed, and a nurse was taking down her particulars, and you have to write down everything. The nurse said religion, so she said none. And then later, when she was in bed, she overheard two of the nurses gossiping about her, and one of them said, "She doesn't look like a nun."
Yeah.
I think we're on the right track, obviously, even in America. In Britain, we're getting there. I think Scandinavia getting there. In Germany, I think pretty good. There's still a nominal loyalty in Germany, I think, to either Catholic or Lutheran church, so much so that they actually pay taxes.
Yes.
Not just in general, but you pay a tax to... stop me if I got this wrong. It seems hard to believe. Once you're baptized as, say, either Catholic or Lutheran, then you have to pay tax to that church unless you actually go and pay money in order to disassociate yourself from that church.
Yeah,
That's got to be something wrong there.
It's actually withheld from your paycheck, just like in America's Social Security and your health care and whatever is taken out of your paycheck. You never even see the money, which, by the way, was why Scientology tried to get in Germany in the 90s as a major religion so they could get in on that withholding thing. And that's why the Germans, who had some experience with fringe cults in the past, said, no, Scientology is not a major religion. But by the way, the humanists, if I recall it, German humanists, they get some state support as a sort of quasi-religion. Now,
it's hard to know how you would define what's a true religion.
Right.
And I imagine that was the point about the Flying Spaghetti Monster, was to raise awareness of the absurdity of having a legal definition of what is a proper religion.
Well, particularly Scientology is an interesting test case because in the 90s, when the internet started to take off, ex-members were posting their secret documents online, which was a new thing. And, this was like, oh my God, I can read about Xenu, the galactic warrior, and all that crazy stuff. The church actually got judges to give search warrants to go in and take people's computers, their hard drives, their floppy disks, is what they had at the time, and confiscate them because it was proprietary, copyrighted material, almost like you stole the script for Harry Potter before it was broadcast or something like that, which would imply that they made it up. Right? It's because if you copyright it, then you just made it up. There was another story. You probably know this woman, J.Z. Knight, who channels Ramtha, the 35,000-year-old warrior.
No, I don't.
Oh, yes. So J.Z. Knight, she's from Seattle, Washington, and she was an actress. There's a little background for you. So all of a sudden, she started getting these visions from Ramtha, who was this 35,000-year-old warrior.
Okay, yeah.
Who spoke English with an Indian accent.
Yes, that's right.
Where that was 35,000 years ago is not clear. But then a German woman started channeling Ramtha. And J.Z. Knight said, oh, no. I own Ramtha. It's like...
Copyright.
Yeah, copyright.
Yeah.
Which, if she won that case, I forget how it turned out now. I think she lost the case. But if she won the case, it would imply, well, you just made it up then.
Yeah. Well, I've always wondered about the Book of Mormon being written in the 19th century, but written in the style of 15th century English. Yes, I mean, what's that about? You'd have thought that would have given the game away right away that he's a charlatan.
Yeah.
As if the fact that he was convicted of fraud earlier in his life wasn't enough.
If you've never read John Krakauer's book, Under the Banner of Heaven, first of all, he's a great writer. He's the guy that wrote Into the Wild and Into Thin Air about climbing. He's a climber. Then he got into he wrote a piece for, I think, Vanity Fair, Atlantic, on this multiple shooting of a polygamist family. There was a murder there. And then that led him into the whole polygamy world, which is illegal since 1896. But they do it anyway in these border states between Colorado and Arizona and Utah there, in these little towns where they marry one woman and then the others are sister wives. And so he delved into the history of when Joseph Smith got the revelation from God. He already was having an affair with this woman down the street. So he comes home to his wife. I forget what her name is now, but honey, I've been talking to God. And you're not going to believe what he said. You know our friend down the street? Well, I have to marry her too. And of course she was, as you would expect, livid about this. Well, then I'm going to take multiple husbands. No, God was really clear about this. It's a guy thing. And all my friends were there. They heard it too. They couldn't believe it either. And it stuck until Utah wanted to become a state in 1896, part of the United States, and the government said, you can't have this polygamy thing. And they got a new revelation from God who said, I've changed my mind about it's back to monogamy. And then the same thing, they got a revelation in the 1970s about African Americans.
Yeah.
I mean, it really shows the cultural boundaries. One funny little personal story. My wife is from Cologne, Germany. Well, Cologne. I don't have to. In America, you have to say that anyway. So when she met, she was pretty much an atheist by then. That was 5 years ago, and she then decided to opt out of the withholding thing, and she had to go down to the courthouse, fill out the paperwork, file a little fee to pay for that. And she wore a black T-shirt that said Dawkins, Dennett, Harrison, Hitchens. Of course, they didn't get it, but but I thought it was pretty delightful. But then they told her, okay, now just to make sure that's clear, you can't get married in the Catholic Church the moment you sign this. Yep, that's fine. And you can't do this and that's fine. But it takes us a while to process the paperwork, so we're going to withhold 3 more months out of your paycheck. And she's like, wait a minute. In a business contract, when it ceases for both parties. Well, not this one.
Well, let's have a big movement here. Everybody go to their church tomorrow and get a...
courthouse? It's a government thing.
Yes, you have to get excommunicated in the case of Catholics, I think. I know I've signed a number of excommunication certificates. People have come to me and said... So if anybody wants me to sign their excommunication certificate after this meeting, I would be only too delighted to do so.
I'm curious how you answer the question that I always get. What would it take, Shermer, for you to believe in God? I mean, I was once a believer, then I became an atheist. I didn't believe for really good reasons then, but now, being a science guy, what's the evidence that would present to you that you would go, you know what, I was wrong. I think there is a God. And so when you go through the things like, well, a miracle happens here on stage, the woman's cut in half or whatever. We've all seen Penn and Teller do this kind of thing. So I can't imagine anything that would happen that I could not imagine also was a trick or an illusion or I misperceived or something like that.
I think that really, really good conjuring tricks are actually quite philosophically worrying from this point of view, because it is, I used to think, well, God would only have to appear, with a great deep Paul Robeson type voice and say, I exist, and maybe trailing clouds of glory. But I mean, have you ever seen a really good conjuring trick? It's very easy to be fooled. Or a hallucination. It is hard. Carl Sagan had an interesting notion in his science fiction book, Contact, where at the end, the heroine, Ellie, calculated the constant pi out to the umpteenth decimal place. And she expressed it in binary. And at some point, way, way, way out in the trillion quadrillionth decimal place, or rather binary place of the constant pi, the digits fell into a square matrix with nothing but zeros, except there was a circle of ones bisected by a diameter of ones. And this was God's signature woven into the very fabric of mathematics. Well, that would be good. Of course, it wouldn't happen. Actually, maybe it would happen. If pi goes on indefinitely, maybe there would have to be somewhere where...
Yeah, and I think that was Carl's way of like with the SETI program, what would constitute a signal of intelligent design? A pulsar is not going to give prime numbers, for example.
No. Although, yes, a pulsar wouldn't. You know the story of periodical cicadas giving prime numbers?
Oh, yeah, that's right. You wrote about that, yeah.
Yeah. Not that it's intelligent life, but at least it's not. It's a way in which prime numbers could be generated. Periodical cicadas are insects which have plague years. They breed every either 13 or 17 years. Different races of them breed either 13 or 17 years, and these are prime numbers, and it's rather odd that they should come out every 13 years or every 17 years. They lurk underground for 13 years, and then suddenly they all come out together, all in one burst. And then 13 years later, they all come out at the same time, except the other species come out every 17 years. And the theory is that they're running an evolutionary arms race with their predators, and the predators could be naturally selected to synchronize their breeding cycles with the prey breeding cycles. So if you choose a time cycle, anything other than a prime number, it's possible for natural selection to favor the predators that synchronize with it. And so the idea is that in the arms race, they gradually lengthened their stride until they hit a prime number that the predators couldn't match. Well, that is at least one way in which you can get prime numbers out of pure nature without a mathematician having to write them down. And the point about it, as Michael was saying, prime numbers would be a very good way for an extraterrestrial intelligence to broadcast to the universe its existence, because the theory goes that there's only one way for prime numbers to be generated, and that's through intelligence. And the point about the cicadas is only that there is another way in which it could happen.
From the bottom up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the same sort of category of thinking about this in terms of the far future of humanity, or if we encountered extraterrestrial intelligences, the point that SETI people make is they're not going to be, first of all, they're not going to be bipedal primates with gnarly stuff on their forehead speaking English, like in Star Trek. And they're not going to be just 5 years ahead of us technologically, like at Roswell, where they, back engineered silicon chips or something like this was the best aliens could do. They'd be millions of years ahead of us. So if you just take, Moore's law for anything and extrapolate it out and look how far we've come in just a half century or a century or so of technology, they'd be like a million years ahead of us. Pretty much they could do anything we would call God.
They would have to be in order to get here, because it'd be so difficult to get here. When I was about 6, I wrote a science fiction story called Bobo Goes to the Moon. It was about a dog that went to the moon. And I had enough sense to realize that the people on the moon wouldn't speak English. So I made them speak French instead.
That's great.
But there's a geologist, quite a well-known geologist, called Simon Conway Morris, who does believe that we could expect them to be humanoid. He's very impressed by the power of convergent evolution, and there are numerous examples around the animal kingdom of animals that come from different starting points in evolution and converge on the same endpoint, because it's a very good way to be for a certain way of life. And he's sufficiently impressed by that to think that we should not be over-surprised if the unimaginative science fiction plot came true and they really were humanoid, not speaking English or French, but at least bipedal, with perhaps eyes pointing forward, big brain. I'm a bit skeptical of that, although I'm second only to Simon Conway Morris in my admiration for convergent evolution. He rather spoils it by dragging God in. I think he's got a bit of an agenda there. He wants there to be alien life that is humanoid for some kind of theological reason, I suspect.
I think so. I think he also argued that there's probably not extraterrestrial intelligence of our capability.
Oh yes, I didn't know that.
I think that's right. But yeah, because if that were true, then of the billions of species that have evolved on Earth, how come only one lineage ended up as bipedal primates, and we're the last one standing? Well, I mean, shouldn't have it happened dozens of hundreds.
One has to be first, I suppose.
So it has to be first. Yeah. Okay. Right. Yeah.
And then once one is first, it might stop all the others. Also, it's not obvious that it's an ideal way of life. There are plenty of other very good ways of life, other than being intelligent.
We know that well in America.
I forbore to remark on that.
He who will not be mentioned tonight.
Yeah.
But the point is that how would you know it was God if you encountered somebody who was capable of genetically engineering cells or engineering planetary systems or something like this? These are just advanced problems to be solved with technology and any sufficiently advanced technology.
I've started to come round to that view. I used to think it would be an easy point to demonstrate for God to demonstrate his existence, but miracles are not that impressive when you compare them with even earthly conjuring tricks, let alone the tricks that highly advanced civilizations of the kind that are capable, that if we were ever visited, as you said, they would have to be so hugely more advanced than us that they would appear to be godlike. Some people try to say from that, well, that means you sort of do believe in God because you do believe that there are extra. But there's a huge difference between a highly advanced creative intelligence which has evolved by gradual, slow steps, which is what would be the case for an extraterrestrial intelligence, and one that was there from the origin of the universe and created the universe. There's every difference in the world between those two. Some people can't see that distinction. It's a hugely important distinction.
By the way, parenthetically, do you have an opinion on the Fermi paradox? Where is everybody if life is abundant?
Where is everybody? I'm not at all surprised we've never been visited, because actually visiting bodily is such a... I mean, why would they bother to come here, for one thing?
Right.
But why haven't we picked up radio transmission? That is more of a puzzle. The statistical calculation that leads one to suspect there is extraterrestrial life is based upon the huge number of stars and therefore planets, as we now know that virtually all stars have planets. So that's a strong statistical argument. On the other hand, it is conceivable that the origin of life on a planet is such a stupendously improbable event that it has only happened once. And if that were the case, then it would have to be here, because here we are. So that's not, I mean, it's not demonstrable that we are accompanied by other life forms. Then again, you could say, well, it could be a very improbable but not utterly improbable event. So there may be only a matter of a few billion life forms in the universe. Well, a few billion is very few. It's a very small number compared to the 10 to the 22 possible places. So that the life forms that have evolved out there could be so spaced out that they never encounter one another, even by radio. I think it would be enormously exciting if SETI were to pick up intelligent signals. Of course, the evolution of intelligent life is another step beyond the evolution of life at all. It could be that life has evolved, has originated, bacterial life, something like bacterial life, has originated many times, but only on very few occasions has it broken through to perhaps multicellular life, or perhaps intelligent life capable of broadcasting signals such as we might pick up.
You could get all the way to Neanderthals and have us go extinct and they survive.
Yes.
And there's no indication that they were proceeding along toward...
And then we've only been capable of it for a century or so.
Right.
And so our signals are expanding in a bubble which doesn't yet have a very large radius. It's been suggested that once a civilization reaches a sufficient technical level to produce high energy radio, then they also are capable of destroying themselves.
Right.
And so it might be that we have that they're all over the universe. There are little sparks of intelligent life coming into existence and then snuffing themselves out almost immediately.
Which is why we have to colonize Mars, just in case.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm not going.
Yeah. Well, it's a one-way trip for start.
Yes,
isn't it?
that's right. Yeah. Now back to the we're talking here about generic gods. Back to the Christian God or the monotheism God. Our late friend Vic Stanger made the point that we don't even have to make this argument. If that God exists, the universe should show certain features, and it doesn't. And therefore, we can kind of disprove disprove a hypothesis. The hypothesis has not been proved because here are the characteristics it would have to meet, and it doesn't meet those.
You mean that the universe should be more friendly?
More friendly.
Yeah.
The problem of evil is the biggest one.
Yes.
God's all powerful and all knowing.
Well,
and all
yeah,
that,
but there's no reason why he shouldn't be an evil God. I mean, no reason to assume that God has to be good.
Well, yes, but the Christian God.
Oh, yeah, the Christian God.
That one.
Yeah. So good that he had to have his son crucified in order to forgive the rest of us.
Because he loved us. Yes, I've been trying out a new argument with Christians who absolutely must believe in the resurrection, or else why would you be a Christian? So it had to happen. Why do you think it happened? They give the arguments. And then I say, okay, why don't the Jews accept those arguments? Now, you can't say because they believe the wrong God. They believe the same God as you. They even believe the same book, at least the old part of it. And Jews even believe there will be a Messiah. He just hasn't come yet. So they're that far with you. They know the arguments. You can't say they don't understand the arguments. These are learned rabbis, have been studying this for 2,000 years. Why don't they accept it? And I never get a good answer other than, well, I'm praying for them or something like that.
Yeah.
But by way of background, to seg into a related question about truth, last year I did a podcast with Joe Rogan on ostensibly about ancient archaeology, who built the pyramids, that sort of thing, with a fellow named Graham Hancock. Now, he doesn't believe ancient aliens came here and built the pyramids, but he thinks there was a civilization that lived 20,000 to 30,000 years ago that built them, and they're much older than archaeologists think. So this is sort of alternative archaeology category, of which there are many, but he's that particular one. Anyway, so he's kind of an interesting character, and he's really into altered states of consciousness, particularly the ones you do artificially. So,
oh, I've got him. Yeah, people keep trying to get me to take drugs with him.
That's it. So about 6 months ago, he wrote to Richard and I and invited us to go to Costa Rica, where there is this resort. It's a nice place. I mean, first-class tickets, stay at the resort for free food, yoga, it's great, massages, everything you want. But you got to do ayahuasca every day for 5 days. Now, I didn't know much about ayahuasca, so I read up on it, and I stopped at you vomit for 4 hours every day because it purges the negative energy and the bad things that happen in your life, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Okay, but the reason he wants us to do this is because most people that take ayahuasca come back convinced that there is this other world, this spirit world, this other dimension, the doors of perception are opened through the ayahuasca. It's a way of engaging your brain with this other world. And then we would come back and go, we were wrong. Not that we're Christians, but that we now know there's this other world.
And we'd win the Templeton Prize.
That's right, we'd win the Templeton Prize. So let's say we did that, and unlikely, but let's say it happened, and we were convinced. And I write one of my Scientific American columns, I was wrong, there's this, and you write in one of your books, I discovered the spirit world. Why should our readers or any scientist or anybody with a brain think that there's a good argument there?
Well, because we're hallucinating, a subjective argument like that is no kind of argument. You've got to have an objective argument. It sounds a bit similar to Michael Persinger's helmet, which I think you've tried as well. Well, yes. This is a Canadian neurologist who has a rather interesting piece of research that he does. He puts a modified motorcycle helmet on your head, and you sit in total darkness, and he passes magnetic field through your brain. And with about 80% of people, they have a religious experience of some sort. If they're Catholic, they tend to see Virgin Marys. If they're it depends what their religion is. If they're people like us, they tend to feel at one with the universe and things like that. And I was rather looking forward to that. I was rather hoping to feel this sense of great spiritual oneness with the distant universe and with everything. Nothing happened with me at all, unfortunately. This was all done for a BBC television documentary, And the BBC made a kind of gesture towards science by having a control, which was one vicar who also underwent the same experience. And he also reported that no kind of spiritual experience. However, Dr. Persinger believes he was lying because Persinger also monitored the electroencephalogram, the EEG waves of the brain at the same time. And the EEG waves of one of the 80% susceptible people look different from the EEG waves of one of the 20% non-susceptible. And I showed the standard EEG waves of the 20% non-susceptible. The vicar was right up at the extreme susceptible end, but yet he was denying that he got anything. Instead, he filled his brain with something. It might have been reciting the multiplication table or something, desperately trying to shut out the spiritual awareness which Persinger's magnetic helmet was inducing. Not quite sure why a vicar would want to do that, actually. Maybe something about not wanting to admit that his spirituality was influenced by brain states. Do you think that's plausible?
I don't know. Persinger, he kind of plays fast and loose with the interpretations of these experiences.
Does he? Yes.
I had some experiences in there. I felt like I kind of left my body a little bit. There's a video on YouTube. You can just type Shermer, out-of-body experiences. And I felt like a few things happened. But on the other hand, I've also done sensory deprivation tanks. You know, it's a big thing in California. You lay in these warm salt water, and so you're just floating there, and they close the lid so it's dark and it's quiet. And so you're basically getting no sensory stimulation. And then your brain, after about an hour, starts producing stuff, light hallucinations, just kind of fun stuff, drug-free and legal. And I couldn't tell the difference between what Persinger was doing and just doing that.
So you are in total darkness.
Yeah. So that's right. So I think he needs better controls for that. But I do like what he's doing in the sense he's looking for some natural explanation for an apparently paranormal phenomenon. So to that extent, I use that as an example as well, that there's no such thing as the supernatural, the paranormal. There's just the natural, the normal, and stuff we haven't explained yet with natural means. So, for example, if Deepak's favorite theory about consciousness, quantum consciousness, you probably know Stuart Hameroff and Roger Penrose's theory about the quantum states inside the microtubules and neurons. And these quantum states, when you have a thought, the neurons fire in a particular sequence, and this causes the quantum state to go across the distance, whatever it is, like the spooky action at a distance with quantum experiments, and it affects the quantum states in your brain. It causes your neurons to fire in the same pattern as mine, and we can read each other's minds. Okay, this is all bullshit, but let's say it turned out to be true. That would no longer be ESP. That would just be physics or neuroscience or whatever.
Yes, yeah. Just better science or different science.
Right. Yeah.
Can I ask you something, Michael? I'm about the moral arc, which is just printed in German. Is that right? It's just being.
Yep. Just came out, yeah.
You perceive an increase in moral sense as history goes by. We're getting better. We've abolished slavery. We have a better attitude towards kindness and towards women and everything. And I have called this, I think it's the same as what I've called the shifting moral zeitgeist. In both cases, we notice that as the centuries go by, things that in past centuries were regarded as intolerably reactionary. And I mean, if you look back, I'm fond of looking back just to the 19th century, where Darwin and Huxley and Abraham Lincoln were right in the forefront of advanced, liberal, moral, right-on values. Yet they were, by today's standards, incorrigibly racist. I mean, Lincoln freed the slaves, but nevertheless he made speeches in which he said that, of course, obviously nobody but an idiot would think that black people are the equal of white people and they should ever be given the vote and all that kind of thing. And Huxley said similar things, although he was right in the vanguard of advanced thought, you can pretty much label any writer by simply looking at his moral values and saying, right, he must have lived in the 1920s or the 1940s or whatever. We change at an astonishingly rapid rate. And you've, I think, compared it to the Flynn effect, which is rather different. But the Flynn effect is the increase in measured IQ during the 20th century, decade by decade. There's a really substantial increase in IQ. So it has to be standardized so that the mean is 100. It's 100, but you can do that. And it looks as though IQ really does, measured IQ really does increase in the same kind of way as the shifting moral zeitgeist. And I think it's empirically obviously true. It happens. What I'm less clear about is actually, as with the Flynn effect, as with the Flynn IQ effect, the moral Flynn effect, the shifting moral zeitgeist or the moral arc, in both cases, it's mysterious what's causing it.
Yeah. Yeah, so Pinker first floated that idea in Better Angels of Our Nature, because in the Flynn effect, it's not just that the overall IQ scores are going up. It's in particular in the abstract reasoning portions of the test. So things like arithmetic, vocabulary, they haven't gone up much. It's you take a three-dimensional figure and you rotate it in space 3 times, and then you have to pick the one down here that would match what it would look like.
Those are the ones I can't do, by the way.
Sorry. You kids stay in school because we're going to need you. It's getting smarter 3 points every decade. So then the jump that is arguable, I suppose, debatable, is to reason morally. It requires that kind of abstract rotation. I have to put myself in your head to imagine how you would see the world, and to then employ something like the golden rule. How would Richard feel if I did this to him? How would I feel if he did this to me? Well, okay, that requires this constant shifting back and forth. So there's some evidence. When I wrote this in 2015, these studies hadn't been replicated. A couple of them have now, where people who read literature, novels, good novels, not People magazine type, trash novels, but good novels, Jane Austen kind of stuff. They score higher on these mind reading tasks. So you show people pictures of people's faces and say, what is this person feeling? And people
empathy test.
Yeah. So people that read a lot score higher on those. So the interpretation is that reading novels helps train the brain for you to see what the world looks like through another character's eyes.
And therefore to be more moral.
Yeah, that's the idea.
We have it on the authority of Donald Trump's ghostwriter that he's never read a book in his adult life.
That explains a lot. His book, yes.
He didn't even write it, let alone read it.
Yeah, we weren't going to mention it, but it's on the table. Okay, it's all right. It's okay. We deal with this every hour now in America. Yeah. At first, it was like once a month, something crazy would happen. Then it was once a week. Then it was once a day. Now it's pretty much every hour.
Yeah.
So, So I I agree with Pinker. There's nothing inevitable about it. The whole thing could be reversed. Not likely on the big things. It's not like slavery is going to come back legally. There is slave trade, slave labor and the sex trafficking and that sort of thing, which is a kind of slavery, but it's not legal. And it happens in countries with crappy governments that can't enforce the laws against slavery. It's not like women are going to lose the vote now that they have in every country, including Saudi Arabia. So I think those big ones will continue. I think the little setbacks are like, populism, white nationalism, authoritarianism, some of those we have to think of as 3 steps forward, 2 back.
Temporary blips, yes.
I hope.
But looking at the big picture and the shifting moral zeitgeist as it goes on from century to century, or decade to decade, actually, I'm not clear what it's about. I think it's a kind of complicated mixture, a bit more like Moore's law, which seems to be empirically the case that computer power, as measured by various measures, increases at a very fixed rate, actually, exponentially. The doubling time of about 18 months, I think. But it doesn't have one cause. It seems to be a complicated feeding in of lots of different causes. And I suspect that's the case with the shifting moral zeitgeist as well, that it's a sort of general something in the air, not to sound mystical, but dinner party conversations in pubs, legal decisions, parliamentary decisions, television, journalism, books, all these things in a rather heterogeneous way combine to cause a continuous, with occasional blips, shift in the same direction. We're getting better.
Yeah, you had some examples. I think it was in the God Delusion you talked about that, right?
Probably, yes.
The language shift.
Yes.
So we can kind of see how that happens right now, because we're going through this with this whole gender pronoun business, where if I say I want to be called a Z or a Zer or whatever, and I'm asking you to do that. And then maybe the next time you write a book, you'll say, Shermer, Z.
Yes.
So now there's a difference between like you and me just having a conversation about it, but then you see how it spreads. All of a sudden it's across college campuses. Yeah. In part, the Jordan Peterson phenomenon is driven by the fact that he stood up and said, no, I'm not going to do that. And that was pretty controversial, because before that, this is just kind of what we do. When people say, I don't want to be called that anymore. I think he said that as a matter of courtesy, he would have no objection to doing it. That's right. It's the government
he objected to being compelled to do it.
Right,
Which so do I. I must say.
Yeah, because like when we were first younger, when we were young, when the his or her thing, and you kind of clumsily go through, and I guess now it's acceptable to say they when you're referring to the singular. Maybe I'm still uncomfortable doing that, but apparently that's grammatically acceptable now. That all happened without any government top-down regulation. People just...
That's what I mean by something in the air.
Yeah, yes.
That does happen.
But you can see it through like comedians. Black comedians will use the N-word. I never would.
Yes.
And I think most white comedians don't now.
Yes.
And we've seen how that kind of just evolved. Just people, 1,000, 10,000 conversations a day in which that comes up, and you say, I'm not going to use that word. And that's how it happens.
Yes. I don't like the his or her, him or his. I prefer to use she because I'm male. I think there's something rather gracious about using the opposite sex to your own, but probably that treads on somebody's corns. I don't know.
Yeah. So I guess there's always this tension between, do we drive it from the bottom up? Like, how do we spread atheism? Well, we just have 10,000 conversations versus, we got to pass laws. Well, we need laws about discrimination probably.
Yes.
But not like what you call people.
No, you can't legislate about how you use language.
Remember the Brights?
Yes.
This was an attempt to change the word from atheism to bright. I don't know if any of you remember this, but it didn't go anywhere because it was pretty clear to most people that if the opposite of the bright are the dims, and those are the people that believe in God, which we thought was funny because, well...
Dan Dennett suggested that the opposite of since the definition of a bright was somebody who did not believe in the supernatural, that the flattering way to describe those who do was call them supers, and nobody should mind being called a super.
Right. But I guess the problem is you can't just by fiat say this is the word we're going to use. It just happens. Like, how did 9/11 start getting used? I don't think anybody knows. It just started getting used.
That's right, and it's used all over the world. Even it's only in America that the month goes before the day.
Right.
So it should be 11/9.
That's right. That's right.
In the rest of the world, but we've all adopted 9/11.
Yeah, that's right. Another example of a bottom-up change. Yeah. So I think we're getting there. It's fun to speculate in the long-term future. I just wrote an article on colonizing Mars. What kind of government? Elon says we're going to Mars. Okay, we're going to Mars. What kind of government are you going to set up there? So I tweeted at him just for fun, and amazingly he tweeted back saying, "Oh, we don't have to worry about government. Just straight democracy, and just everybody votes, and then it's going to be fine." It's like, no, we already went through all this centuries ago, and a one-to-one democracy like that just doesn't, mob rule and so on. Anyway, but it's fun to speculate about. At the end of the moral arc, I speculate about the eventual demise or falling away of the nation state as a concept, and we'll get back to city states. And just as that book hit the press, then Trump and authoritarianism and nationalism, and the nation now is back as a big thing, which can be discouraging. You're kind of a globalist, right?
A what, sorry?
A globalist.
Well, I hate the idea of nation states. I mean, I hate make America great again. We want to make the world great again. We want to make the whole of humanity great, rather than be loyal to what on earth is so good about a nation. I mean, we've been through that, as you say, and look where that got us.
Right, but absolutely. But their counter to, let's say, Steelman, the other side argument, that maybe we'll find some sympathy with, if we just open the borders and let everybody in, and then the terrorists come in. We don't live in a global world where that everyone can just get along. There are still bad, evil people that we have to have walls against.
Yeah, that is a worry. I mean,
Angela Merkel does a moral thing by opening the borders to people that are oppressed from an authoritarian regime, and then she gets hammered for this.
I was talking to a young woman yesterday who is an ex-Muslim apostate, now living in Germany, and she gets persecuted and threatened by fellow refugees from Islamic countries who have come into Germany and want to live in Germany, presumably ought to be accepting a German way of life, and yet they're persecuting a fellow refugee from an Islamic country because she doesn't follow their stinking religion.
Do you sometimes feel like our tribalism is so deep in our DNA, both literally and metaphorically, that it's going to be almost impossible to break out of that, either politically or religiously? There's always going to be these kind of tribal conflicts.
I was having a meeting with Steven Pinker just yesterday, and he reminded me of something which I find totally hard to believe, which is that people's attitudes to controversies which ought to be purely scientific, like, for example, climate change, are governed by the tribe they belong to, the political tribe they belong to, rather than by the evidence. And
That's
so
right.
their attitude to evolution or abortion or something like that is a tribal thing. Well, I should have said evolution, because that's a purely factual matter. That your attitude to something purely factual like evolution should be governed by the political tribe to which you belong is a terrible indictment of humanity, really.
Yes, and it continues.
Yeah. I find it hard to believe.
Well, it's a way of signaling. You don't have to know anything about climate change. It's just a way of signaling to your tribe.
Yes.
Steve makes the point of Al Gore's film, Inconvenient Truth, was actually a bad thing for climate science.
Counterproductive.
Because Al Gore is a liberal, and we know the liberals are bad.
Yeah.
And so then it got affiliated with the political movement rather than just a scientific issue. Yeah. I want to talk about, just for a moment, back to the atheism thing, because I also get this a lot. What do you say to somebody who's dying, or a friend that's lost somebody, or somebody that's going through an existential crisis? I have no meaning in my life. There's this moment in Ricky Gervais's wonderful movie, The Invention of Lying. Have you seen this?
No, I haven't.
Film? It's a great film. He's really funny, but it's a very deep and thoughtful film. So he lives on this. It's a fictional world where everybody always tells the truth. And so he discovers one day, quite by accident, when he goes to the bank, the bank teller will just give you however much money you tell them that you have in your account. Yes. And he mistakenly gives too high an amount, and he assures her that he has that, so she gives him the money, and then he checks his account and realizes, I can just say whatever I want. So, of course, the humor follows quickly from there. He's walking down the street and he sees this beautiful woman. He says, "We have to have sex right now or the world's going to end." And she says, "Do we have time for a hotel room, or do we have to do it right here?" And then there's a bunch of stuff with his buddies and so on. But then it kind of turns a little darker, where his mother is in the hospital and she's dying, and And she asks him, what's going to happen to me now? And so he has that moment like at the bank, and he's like, what do I say? Then he makes up this story. Well, in heaven, you're going to heaven. Everybody gets a mansion, a big, beautiful mansion. And, you know, people are there waiting on you and all the food you want. And she's got this glowing smile on her face. And then somebody overhears this in the other room, and the word quickly spreads. Did you hear? We all get a mansion. And so pretty soon now there's a throng outside of his house.
I would see that, but I haven't seen it.
There's a throng outside of his house. Tell us about the mansion and what happens. And he's now like Moses. So, and then in a funny moment, he had ordered pizza. He's got 2 big pizza boxes. So he opens the pizza boxes, pizza's gone, and he writes 10 commands. Like, these are the things that we should do. And he comes out there with the 2 pizza boxes. It's really funny.
What's the film called?
The Invention of Lying. The Invention of Lying.
How have I missed
really
that?
Good, yeah.
It sounds wonderful.
But it is that question. What do you say to somebody at that moment?
It is, yeah, it is. It's a question of whether you betray truth in the interests of comfort. And my attitude is, I write my books, and you can read them if you want, but I don't thrust them down your throat. And so I'm not going to go into hospital and visit dying patients and say, when you die, that's it. I don't have a very good answer to it. There are various euphemisms going around, like you become one with the stars and you go back to the universe, right, where your material came from. I think one attitude that I sort of have myself is that there actually is something rather frightening about eternity. Going simply forever, being dead forever, but also being alive forever is terrifying as well. So what's terrifying is eternity. It's not being dead forever. It's actually much worse to be alive forever, because you would actually experience the eternity. What a terrifying idea. What you need for something like that is a general anesthetic.
Yes.
Which is what we're going to have.
Right.
I suppose, one can use these, was it Mark Twain said, I was dead for billions of years before I was alive and never suffered the smallest inconvenience.
All right. Well, Hitch made this point about the Christian heaven being like celestial North Korea.
Oh, yeah.
You have this dictator that knows all your thoughts. I don't want somebody to know my thoughts.
Yes. And the party you can't leave.
And you can't. That's right. You're at the party and you can never leave. Right. Yeah. And Julia Sweeney, in her wonderful monologue, Letting Go of God, when the Mormon boys come to her door in Hollywood, and they're given the pitch about why she should join the Mormon religion. And they give her the whole thing about, the blind will see again, and the deaf will hear again, and the handicapped will be made whole again. And she said, well, I had uterine cancer. Do I get my uterus back? And they go, yeah. And she goes, I don't want it back. And she said, what if you had a nose job and you liked it? Do I have to have my own nose back? And then they give her a thing, and you get to spend eternity with your family. And she went, ugh. The moment you start thinking about, what is up there in heaven? This is the topic of my latest book, Heavens on Earth. The problem of identity, and turns out Christian religions have debated this. Like, are you physically resurrected up there? This is like the Star Trek transporter problem. What's up there? Because if it's physically you, how old are you? And so somebody figured out the answer. It's 30. You're 30, because that's the age Jesus was. And it's a good year when you're strong and your memories are still. Well, I'm 64. So what happened to the 34 years of my body that's not up there? No, it's just your soul. But what's that? It's just a pattern of information that represents my memories. But all my memories, some of the memories, because the memories are not fixed in there. They're always changing. Anyway, I think it's it
doesn't stand up to serious ratiocination, does it?
No. No, it doesn't. We don't have to say anything. On the other hand, we could still be intellectually honest, perhaps, and say, I don't know what happens, because we don't know what happens after death.
That is strictly true, but yeah, I think.
I suppose it depends on who's asking.
Yeah.
But on a related topic, you must get this as well. What's the point of going on if there's no God or there's no afterlife? Why do you get out of bed in the morning?
Oh, that's an easy one. I mean,
Yeah.
How dare you say that? You live in this wonderful world. How dare you? How much more do you want than to say because there is no God, therefore life is not worth living? Okay, just die and make way for somebody else who can appreciate it properly.
Right. Right. And then where do atheists get their morals? Another one of those.
Well, that really gets back to the shifting moral zeitgeist. Wherever we get them from, it's the same as where everybody else gets them from, because we are 21st century people, whether we are religious or not. And on the scale of the shifting moral zeitgeist, we have the same morals as other 21st century people, and different morals from 19th century people, 16th century people. So we get them from whatever is in the air in our century, in our decade. Religious people may think they get their morals from the Ten Commandments or from the Bible, but they don't. They've never read the Ten Commandments, or if they have, they only remember one of them, which is thou shalt not kill. They don't remember that the first commandment is thou shalt have no other gods but me. The second commandment is thou shalt make no graven image. They don't know what they're talking about. They think they get their morals from the Bible, nor should they. But if you actually read the Bible,
Yes.
it'd be an appalling world we live in if we got our morals from the Bible. So atheists get their morals from the same place as decent people get their morals, whether they are religious or not.
Now you make this point, I think it's in the God Delusion, about you're troubled by it when scientists say, when they bump up against one of these questions, well, here we have to hand it off to the theologian.
Oh, God, yes.
And you make a joke like, why not hand it to the plumber?
Yes, exactly right. Exactly right, yes. I got that from the professor of astronomy at Oxford. And I think, actually, it wasn't about morals. It was about the origin of, I don't know, the fundamental laws of nature or something like that. And he said, well, here we have to hand over to our good friend, the chaplain. To which I say, why the chaplain, not the gardener or the chef? Or as you say, the plumber, yes.
But on the other hand, when we talk about, not where do we get our morals from, but to what extent can we determine right or wrong or human values using science and reason, most philosophers and scientists will say, well, at this point, we hand it off to the whoever, the utilitarian philosopher,
moral philosophers,
the virtue philosopher, the Rawlsian philosopher or whatever.
Yeah.
And as you know, Sam Harris, myself, a little bit Pinker, are kind of pushing for this. Well, no, wait a minute. Scientists can have something to say about this. How far do you go on this?
Yes. Yeah. You've got to have probably some, I mean, in Sam's case, and I think yours, you have a kind of axiom that suffering is bad.
Yeah.
And it's hard to dispute that, but nevertheless, it is something you have to accept. Well, fundamentally, the bedrock of my moral faith is that suffering is bad, and we should do all we can to avoid suffering among sentient beings, and that can get a bit controversial too. But once you've done that, then everything else really follows by scientific reasoning, in which I would include moral philosophic reasoning, which is based on scientific principles, logical principles, anyway. So once you accept a fundamental axiom like suffering is bad, then you can pretty much do it all by scientific reasoning.
I think so, although the critics would counter and say, well, let's move away from the left wall of simplicity to more complicated issues like should women wear a burqa or not, or female genital mutilation is an even worse case. What if the culture there says this is our culture, and it's none of your business what we do, you Westerners. You call it suffering. We don't. We call it culture or the richness of our religion or whatever. And even some of the women will say, yes, this is what we'd like to do. How do you know?
I wonder whether any woman has ever really said, I want to be genitally mutilated.
Probably not.
Yeah. They might be so brainwashed as to think.
This is what I worry. So there's maybe a couple of criteria. The moral, the issue that's being discussed in that culture, is it totally prevalent, or are there people that don't want to do it? And if they say they want to, are they really autonomous, volitional beings? It's like the polygamy question. Shouldn't consenting adults do whatever they want? Or the prostitution question. Shouldn't women be able to do whatever they want? Yeah, but when the girls are at 7 years old married off, they're not autonomous agents or drug addicted or whatever. And so there's some criteria we could use.
Well, there's no doubt that when one says that once you've got the axiom, then everything else follows by logical reasoning. But moral philosophy is notoriously a pitfall for difficult questions like this. The Burke question is one. Another one is these standard moral philosophic dilemmas like miners trapped underground. It would cost so and so many dollars to rescue them. That money could be spent on feeding starving people in
trolley problems.
Yeah. And the trolley problems. These are well-recognized problems. They're very difficult problems, and they arise whether you're religious or not. But that's not an argument against using scientific principles. It's just, these are further difficulties which we have to face anyway when doing moral philosophy.
I don't know where you stand. We've never discussed abortion. I presume you're pro-choice.
Yes.
As am I. But I have to say to pro-lifers who say you're killing a fetus, you're killing a potential human life. That's right.
It's also right that by refraining from having sexual intercourse, you're depriving a human life.
That's true. So therefore, get out there. That's right.
I mean, they might counter that by saying, yes, but before you have sex, there is no particular human life that's in existence. So you're not actually depriving any particular
the moment of
individual.
Conception is where they.
But then you confront them with identical twins, and you say, okay, which of these two twins got the soul?
Right.
And I've never met a Catholic capable of answering that question.
Split souls. Yes, well, so, I mean, there's no good place to draw the line. A counter-argument is personhood. You're not a legal person, therefore protected by laws and so on until well, now in the United States, it's the second trimester. After that, the start of the third trimester, unless the mother's life is in danger, you are a person, a legal person. So somebody recently killed a woman who was pregnant in her third trimester, so it's a double homicide, for example.
Yeah. I'm not impressed by the need to define something so rigid as personhood. I know lawyers have to do that. Lawyers insist on drawing lines like that. It seems to me that personhood is something that develops gradually, and a single-cell zygote is a tiny step of the way towards personhood, and as you go further, you're further more and more. But coming back to suffering, what's absolutely clear is that to the extent that a fetus can suffer, an adult cow or pig can suffer a hell of a lot more. And so you're being totally hypocritical if you're passionate against abortion, but yet kill or torture, in slaughterhouses and things.
There is a movement within the animal rights movement to make this personhood argument, say, for chimpanzees and gorillas, just as a legal strategy.
Yes.
But of course, Peter Singer is the pioneer here on this expanding circle idea to include other species. And I have to say, all the arguments for why we should not eat animals that can suffer, I can't counter them. And yet I had a steak the other night. And I know you've struggled with this, and other people that recognize this do as well. It's hard to get completely on board with that.
Yes. But I think in the case of abortion, it clearly is a nonsense to say, because this 8-cell embryo is human, it's therefore special. I mean, there's absolutely no evolutionary justification for that.
Right.
So you should not use the argument that there's something special about humanity when it's a fetus because it's human.
Right.
And the evolutionary counter to that is, I think, totally watertight. At what point in the evolution of humanity would you draw a line? Don't draw lines; they don't exist.
Right. One of my favorite quotes from you is that I think it was, "No Homo erectus mother ever gave birth to a Homo sapien child."
Yes, that's right.
I mean, when you tell people that, they're like, "Well, what? Then how did it ever come about?"
Yes, I met a lawyer once who said, "Isn't this a watertight argument against evolution? Every child born." Let me think. How did it go? Yes, if you go back in evolution, there has to be a point where our ancestors were of a different species, and yet we're told that species can't reproduce with other species. Isn't that a watertight argument against evolution? Doesn't that prove that evolution never happened? To which the answer is, you reach voting age, you can vote at the age of 18. Doesn't that prove that development never happens? Because
right. Yeah, that's a good argument. Well, Richard, we've been going a little over an hour, and we are instructed to leave time for some Q&A. So I don't know if we have a microphone or how you want to do it. He says thank you.
could we have the lights up in the house so we can see?
Okay. So, first, thank you very much, dear Michael and dear Richard, for this interesting and entertaining talk. So we have now the opportunity for the audience to ask some questions. So we have a microphone from my point of view on the right side and on the left side, so you can line up.
We can't see a thing. Is it possible to have the lights up? To have the house lights up?
Kann das Licht ein bisschen mehr hier oben ein bisschen mehr runtergefahren
There's a
werden?
mic over there and a mic over there.
So,
I think they want
there's
you
a
to line up.
Mikrofone hier rechts und links. So, dort bitte anstellen. And I have to apologize if we cannot have all questions answered.
I think they want you to,
Because we have only a limited time. I would say 30 minutes for Q&A.
Okay, well, while they're working on the house lights,
the lighting in the audience. Yeah, so that looks good. So wir fangen mit den Fragen an, mal abwechseln. So one on the right, one on the left side. So we will start here on the right side, and then the next on the left side. So please, and only questions, no statements. So and then you can address Michael Shermer and or Richard Dawkins for the question. So please start here on the right side and go on.
Can you hear me all right?
Okay, and please, if possible, in English language.
On the question of convergent evolution, you said that it's possible that any species intelligent enough to produce radio waves, strong enough to be heard from outside, would soon be able to destroy themselves somehow. Could one of those possibilities also be AI? Because neural networks work very similarly similar to evolution, but are much faster and much more efficient. And even now, we already have AI that is smarter and better at doing stuff than we are. Could we expect in 100 years or so to be so obsolete in our current system that we might as well just say, okay, AI, you take over. We aren't necessary anymore.
There's a very interesting book by, is my mic still on?
Yep, you're on.
Max Tegmark, I think it is, suggesting that AI could take off to such a rapid extent that, as you suggest, we could indeed be completely left behind. And however, that would not be a destruction in the same way as, say, a nuclear war would, because the AI that would be our legacy, would be our successors, would be presumably as capable or even more capable of broadcasting signals that SETI could pick up. So that would not be an example of the short-livedness of a civilization. That would have to come from something more destructive. Admittedly, the AI might destroy us, which might be a good thing, but it would not destroy the capacity to communicate with the rest of the universe.
Tegmark's book is Life 2.0. It's a good read. I'm an AI optimist. I'm not worried about it. I don't think the disaster's coming. In a way, Pinker makes this point, actually. It's sort of self-refuting that when you press for examples like, well, we'll instruct this AI machine to make paper clips, and it's going to turn, after it uses up all the material it has, it's going to consume the chair and me and you and all humans, the room, the rest of the whole planet will be paper clips. So this machine is so smart, it can do this, but so dumb, it has no idea what we mean by paper clips and where to stop. And you can apply that to pretty much any example. Like I program my car to take me to LAX, like I did the other day, and to get me there in the shortest route possible, it goes up on sidewalks and plows through pedestrians. Like Elon is going to actually not figure out with his engineers that you're not supposed to do that, or the government regulators are not going to prevent that from happening before it gets to the point where AI can cause our own extinction. So I don't think it's going to happen.
So on the left side, from my point of view.
Yeah, as a person comes from the Middle East out of a war, I have a question of the future of science and weapon development and inventions, and the moral side of life-saving, suffer reduction, and another part, the end of poverty. So how can science help that in the future of humanity?
So, what was the question? I didn't.
So, in the moral side of science, how would it help with the weapon productions?
Weapons production science, right? Yeah, I think this is a question about how science and technology, like the AI question, can be used for immoral means. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Like the bomb?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, well, but of course, the technologies are used by governments or people, not themselves. They don't do this by themselves. So it's not the kind of thing I think scientists have to worry about by themselves, but the ethical aspects of the use of science, which is why Oppenheimer and the rest, you had second thoughts after Hiroshima.
Yes.
Like maybe we shouldn't have done this.
I think the way I'd put it is that if you want to do good things, then science is the way to do it. If you want to do bad things, science is the way to do it as well. So science provides the tools. It's the best possible tools to do whatever governments, whatever politicians, whatever society wants to do. And so if you want to do bad things, then you use scientific means to do it. Whether scientists have an additional responsibility to refuse is another matter, and is certainly arguable, and it might even have happened, I think. I mean, I dare say there are scientists who refuse to work on weapons systems. I think it's been suggested that in the Second World War, The reason why Germany did not develop an atomic bomb was that Heisenberg, the official reason is that Heisenberg miscalculated. But interesting question is whether he deliberately miscalculated as a moral act. And I'm not sure that's ever been settled. Maybe it has.
Yeah, the problem, like back to the AI question, the use of artificial intelligence, the internet, whatever, by rogue states and terrorists and so on, that's the problem. It's not the technology, it's the people. And so to get to nuclear zero is going to be very difficult because of the other guy problem. I'll give up my nukes if you do, but he says, well, I'm not going to until you do. And you end up in this. So now we have 9 nuclear states. So the money that we spend on building these weapons should be spent on game theory analysis or diplomacy or social science or how to get people that are in conflict to talk to each other so that they don't want to do that. Anyway, that's a harder problem.
Okay, next question on the right side.
I'll just take the microphone, I guess. Good evening. First off, I wanted to thank you a lot for this opportunity to speak to you tonight. You mentioned Jordan Peterson earlier, and he's been gaining a lot of popularity. He talks a lot about values, like intrinsic, archetypical values, and they conveniently happen to be Christian values. So my question would be if atheism or secular societies have failed to deliver a compelling narrative for people that they can grasp on. Thank you.
Yes, okay. So, I know Jordan, and I think what the appeal is, you can go on skeptic.com and read my explanation for the phenomenon. I think the appeal is more of self-help. People feel like, not that they don't have the right Christian values, they go to him for the same reason they go to, say, Tony Robbins, who's a huge, literally huge, he's like 6'4", but he's very popular. And, there's a Netflix film called I'm Not Your Guru, in which it shows Tony Robbins is very much everybody's guru. And it has nothing to do with Christian values. He's just talking about, like Jordan, stand up straight, make your room, work out every day, eat white. And because the world is a dangerous, harsh place and people aren't nice, and so you got to be strong, something like that. I think that's the appeal. Where, in my opinion, and that of others that have studied him, he gets a little murky on the, did the resurrection happen? Well, what do you mean by the resurrection? Do you mean suffering for your sins, or like you ask him, do you believe? If you ask me, do you believe in God? The answer is no. If you ask Jordan, do you believe in God? It would take me 40 hours to answer that question. All right, if it takes you 40 hours to answer, then you're talking about something completely different. And there he gets into Jung and Freud and Nietzsche and Dostoevsky and all that stuff. And again, it's okay to say novelists have tapped into deep truths about human nature. That's true. I mean, the reason Shakespeare and Jane Austen and so on are popular novelists is because they're saying something deep that we all kind of get. Like that's true. These power struggles and sexual infidelities and all this stuff. Yeah, they've tapped into that before cognitive scientists started studying it. But to then, and here's where he gets fuzzy. Then he makes a transition from that to like a scientific truth. It's like, no, wait. It's okay to say it's metaphorically true, or the novelist making up this story or tapping into something that's true, but the story's not true. and there he gets a little murky that makes people nervous, like me.
Okay, the next question on the left side.
Professor Dawkins, you said living forever is rather frightening. I wonder, and this question is for both, would you consider or encourage the use of life extension technologies to prolong your life through science?
Well, I might go for 200 years, but that's about my limit.
Yeah, my answer is, because I just wrote that book, Heavens on Earth. So I interviewed all these people, talked to these people. Shermer, don't you want to live to be 500 or 1,000 years? I go, look, just get me to 80 without prostate cancer. Get me to 90 without Alzheimer's. Get me to 100 where I'm not in a bed plugged in. Just incremental. So we call this protopia, not utopia, protopia. Just a little bit better every day. And don't worry about the takeoff point 500 years from now, we get to live forever, something like that. And if along the way, there's a lot of money, startup money in Silicon Valley for these longevity life extension technologies, to which I say, great, because along the way, they're going to have to solve cancer problems, the Alzheimer's, senility, dementia problems, and that would be good. And again, don't worry about just tomorrow.
Okay, next question from the right side.
So we heard Michael talk about Jordan Peterson. I wanted to ask Richard if you have an opinion on him as well, and if you plan on debating him in the future.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that at all.
Jordan Peterson, is that what you said?
Yes, exactly. I wanted to.
He wants to know your opinion, Jordan
Richard's
Peterson.
opinion.
Oh,
and
God.
if you plan on debating him.
Or not, God.
I'm just aware that every time I look at the internet, Jordan Peterson, Jordan Peterson, Jordan Peterson. No, I don't have an opinion.
No.
Why should I have an opinion?
Okay, next Frage von links.
I gather he objects to being forced by Canadian law to use pronouns that people want him to use, and on that I'm thoroughly in his favor. Good for him.
Yeah, my question was Jordan Peterson related, so I guess I just find it weird that you don't have an opinion on him, because your teachings or what you usually say would be contrary.
I never offer an opinion on something of which I'm ignorant.
Yes. Hear, hear.
So I'm very big on progressively moving towards a global culture. And I often do these thought experiments, how we can very constructively move towards a more global culture where we are interacting more with each other. And often the problem that comes to my head is like the tribal instinct in my head feels a bit, cringes a bit when it thinks about, okay, so we are going to lose out on certain languages. We are going to dilute a lot of cultural things. Some of them, of course, are bad. They will be weeded out. But a lot of good stuff will also get weeded out. And somehow I feel that this tribal instinct is getting tapped in a very negative way. And a lot of the problems around in the world is due to this tribal instinct. So how do you see a conceivable, constructive way towards future where we still go towards a global direction, but still placate the tribal instinct that we have within us?
So the problem is the reconciling of tribalism with globalism?
Yes, right. Well, part of it is, first you break down economic barriers. So you allow free trade, then people exchange and they realize you're not a bad person or whatever. Getting political borders to be more porous, I think, is going to be harder because of language and other tribal defining characteristics, something like that.
Yeah. I do think tribalism is one of the great evils, actually, one of the things we really need to work on, to try to... and I think we all suffer from it to some extent and need to purge ourselves of it.
Yes. There's a great documentary film, a PBS film, on Jane Elliott, the third grade teacher in, I think, 1968. Came into her class one day, so these are third graders, and she says, well, we're going to divide the room today into the blue-eyed people and the brown-eyed people. And now you're probably all familiar with the study, but you have to watch the film of how effective she is at making the prejudices happen within minutes, of how quickly, because then one of the brown-eyed students says something and she says, you see, blue-eyed kids, that's just the kind of thing a brown-eyed person would say, isn't it? And they're like, yes, it is.
Yeah.
And then they do a follow-up, which I was not aware of, that she did, I don't know, maybe a decade later, with a group of prison staffers. so guards and administrators or whatever. And she did the same kind of thing, same thing with them, the brown-eyed people and the blue-eyed people. And she started dividing them up, and they fell right into it like the third graders, like within minutes. You know, one of them didn't have the clipboard right. You know, that's just the kind of thing a brown-eyed person would do with a clipboard, see?
Yes.
And they were like, yeah. And it's like, wow.
Yeah. Typical Taurus or typical Libra.
Libra, right.
I think another similar experiment was, perhaps you know this better than me, Michael, dividing children up, giving them at random either green T-shirts or orange T-shirts.
It's the same kind of thing, yeah.
Same kind of thing. And I imagine extending that experiment for a couple of 100 years, when you have a rule that children with orange T-shirts have to grow up and marry other orange children, and green children have to marry other green children, and then they have children of their own who have to wear the same T-shirt, and they go to either orange schools or green schools, and that goes on for 200, 300 years. And what have you got? Northern Ireland.
Thank you. This is leading very well to the question that I have. You were mentioning the nuns. You were mentioning the tribalism, the nationalism that is rising up again in our societies. We can see a lot of Muslim people who somehow cling very much to the belief of their forefathers, let's say. And I am thinking if all this is also very much a sign of a need for an identity in a world where we can really choose pretty much what we want to do. And I'm thinking if the secularism is lacking somewhat this identity, and does it make hard for people to commit themselves on secularism because they feel like it's somehow it's nothing or something. And you, Mr. Dawkins, you have been inventing this A for atheist, which is somehow, I see it as a proposal somehow to give a little bit of an identity to this new atheism or something. But so my question would be, should we put more effort into I don't know, or is it like trying to install a new tribe? What about this secular identity?
I should like to think that we don't need to do that, but unfortunately, it may be that we do, and I'm impressed, as I think we said earlier, by the fact that people do show such astonishing loyalty to their tribe, even with respect to scientific beliefs. And so I would like not to need to do that. I would like to say, here is the evidence. This is what the evidence shows. This is therefore, take it or leave it. But if we really do have to wear a uniform, if we really have to sort of wear a sort of funny hat to show we're atheists or something, I would not wish to be a part of that.
Or wait, a skeptic pin.
Yeah, I know. I mean, you're right. We had this red A as a badge. And I quite like it when somebody comes into a book signing queue wearing a T-shirt that I made up like religion, together we can find the cure, which I see occasionally. But I would like to think we can do that we can do it with the evidence, we can do it by reason, without the need to wear a uniform, without the need to go to church every Sunday and band together as a group.
But maybe not an atheist identity, maybe a humanist identity, which is why the late Paul Kurtz wanted to build a humanist building in every city in the world.
Yes.
A place to go where you can hang out with like-minded people that's for something. We're for civil rights and civil liberties and free speech, and not just we're against this, we're for these things over here. And you've probably spoken at many of these Universalist Unitarian churches, and they're the same kind of thing. They don't really believe in God, and they light candles and they sing hymns to Newton, and they have testimonials about how they lost their religion. And I don't really enjoy these because I don't feel a need to go to church. I never liked that part of religion, but obviously some people do.
Yeah,
they like the Sunday service. without the God.
Well, maybe we can have meetings like this lecture.
Right.
Okay, next question.
So my question is about the discussion of moral objectivity. So you mentioned earlier this sort of moral maxim or moral axiom that all you need to kickstart a discussion about the existence of objective moral values or how we ought to behave morally is to understand that suffering is wrong and sentient creatures can suffer and therefore that's wrong. So that does a lot of work for a person like me. But I find myself often at an impasse when I argue with people that have a different conception of objective morality. Because it seems that by that they understand that a situation in which we have a universe that is only made out of stars and rocky planets, no sentient beings whatsoever, still has some sort of moral code there embedded in it. And they understand that as the only way in which you can understand moral objective values. So I'm wondering, how can I argue with such people to say that it's subjective enough to say that suffering is wrong, and if there are sentient creatures, that's all you need to kickstart and build an objective morality, but they just don't take that as objective enough?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of threads here. So first of all, if you're Tom Hanks stranded on that island, there's no moral issues. It's just you're just by yourself. There's no other sentient beings that can be affected by your action. So morality is not even part of the equation, I think. As for it being built in the universe, not the universe, but in the sentient beings in the universe, there's morality in the sense that if you just think about what's the purpose of a star. The star's purpose is to convert hydrogen into helium. That's what it does. What's the purpose of mountains? They're to grow and erode and so on. So there's purposes in nature. So what's the purpose of humans? Well, read The Selfish Gene and you'll build from there. But at some point, we're interacting with other social beings. And how you interact with them then becomes moral or immoral. And that's when it begins. The hard part about the objectivity is how that word is used. Like we're going to stand outside of humans and find here is where we know abortion is wrong or it's okay, whatever the issue is. You can't because it's a human thing. So within human nature, we have certain impulses that we can discover through science that tell us what humans need. What do we want? We don't want to suffer. And you start there. Now, the critic would say that's not objective knowledge. You're just asking people. Would you like to suffer? No, that's not objective knowledge. I think it is, but there you go. Anyway.
So first of all, thank you both for the great discussion tonight. Looks like 3 people already asked my question, so I'm going to ask it from a different angle. So Professor Dawkins,
please
you
not
said
Jordan
that
Peterson.
you,
please
yes,
not Jordan
unfortunately,
Peterson.
I'm very sorry about that. So you said you have no opinion about him. It looks like he does an opinion about you. There is a video of him saying that he thinks atheists like Richard Dawkins should be oppressed, for starters. And number 2, Michael, I've read your article. I've read Stephen Benker's article on Skeptic magazine. I've listened to all the podcasts with Sam Harris, etc. The trouble is that people like Peterson are filling up the void that was created with millennials and Gen Z by not believing in gods. And he is big with Gen Z in his advocacy of the Christian God, of the Bible, his twisted relationship with reality and truth. And in your time, Michael, you have debunked people like Chopra and others, but you didn't quite push back in your discussions with Peterson. My question is why?
Well, because again, it depends which claim is he making that I'm going to push back on. There's parts of Deepak's that I don't push back on when he says, meditation is good. Okay, yeah, it probably is. Not for me, but other people. Okay, fine. But then when he gets into the quantum consciousness woo-woo, then I push back. So again, I'm happy to push back. I did in my article on Peterson about his theory of truth, the archetypal theory of truth, which is very close to Ronald Hoffman's interface theory of truth. He's a cognitive psychologist at UC Irvine who has this interface theory of truth that the brain is like well, sort of like a laptop screen, and these icons are floating around on there. They don't really exist in the brain. They're just our perceptual icons. So all of what we perceive in nature isn't real. They're just icons because our senses are just converting photons of light into neural impulses, for example. So then you can go, he doesn't quite go so far as say solipsism or something like that. But I push back on that, and Jordan's theory of truth is very similar to that, which I think is incorrect. And I said so, and you know, if you've got 4 or 5 hours to drive, listen to the Sam Harris podcast.
I did, as a matter of fact.
And you know, it's just painful to listen to.
It is.
There was a Star Trek episode where Captain Picard is captured and being tortured, and the torture will stop if he'll say, "There are 5 bright lights here," even though there's 4, and he keeps saying there's 4, and they crank up the pain. And so finally he's rescued, and back at the ship, he tells ship's counselor, Troy, you know, I came to believe there were 5. That was my truth, and I almost said it. But there were really just 4. He's just wrong. All right, so anyway, that's my critique.
That's straight from 1984. When Winston...
Oh, yes, right.
Yeah.
Oh, they stole that. That's right.
They stole it, yeah.
There's only 7 plots in Hollywood. They just recycle them all.
Okay, rechte Seite.
Thank you. So on the subject of tribalism and the future of humankind, barring a highly improbable alien invasion, what do you think, in your opinion, will take for humans to kind of abolish this sense of tribalism and kind of like extrapolate it to the whole planet, to the whole human race?
So you're suggesting that if we're invaded by aliens, we would become one tribe?
Yeah.
There are precedents for that, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's an area of cognitive science, what's called debiasing or deprogramming people, where, like, what's the best way to get a climate denier to accept the science? Okay, it turns out it's not just throw the facts right there in front of them and then he'll go, oh, I see. No, you have to, like in the previous example, you have to say, this is not a left-wing, right-wing issue, and you have to take the politics out of it. You can keep your belief in free markets and unfettered capitalism, you can have all that, but here's this other issue here, I just want to get you there. Or you can keep your Jesus, but evolution happened anyway, whatever. If you give somebody a choice between Jesus and Darwin, if they're believers, they're not going to accept Darwin, right? So the idea is to figure out what it is they're really signaling when they say I believe this, and then go after that. There's research on like teaching students, like what's the best way to get them to accept critical thinking principles or something like that. And anyway, Pinker has a nice chapter on this I think it's in Enlightenment Now, summarizing the research on debiasing, deprogramming. First of all, you can tell people about the confirmation bias, the hindsight bias, and so on. Unfortunately, there's another bias, the bias that I can now recognize the cognitive biases in everybody else. Fortunately, I'm not subject to those. Yeah. Self-serving bias.
Okay, linke Seite.
I have 2 very brief questions. The first is that in the United States, an atheist cannot become president, no matter what good of a politician they are. Do you think that will perhaps ever change?
I think it already changed. I think we have one.
Well, that's a good point. And the second is that, more rather directed to Professor Dawkins, you said earlier that modern morality is a product of change in society, and I totally approve. But isn't there another second huge aspect on the origin of morality, which could be derived from perhaps altruistic genes or group solidarity behavior, which can be observed in a chimpanzee?
I think it's true that there are evolutionary roots to morality, which you can trace in both from ethological studies of chimpanzees and other mammals, and also from Darwinian theory, but that's just the basis of it, and then culture comes along and builds upon that, and it's that's subject to the changing moral zeitgeist. But you're absolutely right that there is an evolutionary basis which we can call upon when trying to understand morality. Yes, I agree.
Thank you. One of my favorite lines from The Selfish Gene is that the difference between a rock and an organism is the rock doesn't kick back if you kick it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And it begins right there.
Yeah.
So I'm afraid if we take all these questions, it would take another 30 minutes, and it's a little bit too long. So I would propose 2 questions from this side and 2 questions from that side, and then we have a book signing. So the next question here.
Mr. Dawkins, you alluded earlier to the very political nature of the processes that govern which domains of science or which exact scientific facts we rely upon when formulating arguments or building our worldview. Surely the race differences in IQ are known to you, and aside from Sam Harris, I'm not aware of anyone on the left side of the political spectrum who really addresses this issue. And of course, it is then capitalized on by the right wing. You surely know that, for example, Ashkenazi Jews or other European ethnic groups score about 1 standard deviation above the mean, which is 100, as you mentioned earlier. But unfortunately, on the other end of the bell curve, we have some African tribal groups who only score, I think, about 60, which is unfortunately reported by independent researchers, since pretty much the first IQ tests were taken there. So what do you make of it that only the right, if any people at all, addresses this question?
I'm afraid I was ignorant of the facts that you quote, and probably I was aware that an astonishingly high number of Nobel Prizes in science have been won by people of Jewish cultural heritage. It's very difficult to decide when you have figures like that to what extent these might be of genetic origin, to what extent they might be of cultural origin. There are such huge cultural differences between the groups that you mention. I mean, certainly the case of the Flynn effect itself, the increase in IQ over the 20th century, over decades, that happens too fast to be a genetic evolutionary effect, even if one can imagine a selective pressure in favor of it. So that, at least that shows that we can get dramatic differences in IQ which are of non-genetic origin. That would make me tend to be suspicious of the suggestion that the differences that you describe are of genetic origin. But I think scientists should always be open-minded to such possibilities, and we should not automatically reject a hypothesis simply because it's politically or socially undesirable.
I should point out that, yeah, absolutely. The comment that only right-wing people point out the racial differences in IQ and liberals don't. All of this research is conducted by professional cognitive scientists and psychologists, published in peer-reviewed journals and so on. There are hundreds and hundreds of them. They're all academics. They all teach at universities. And we know from studies of the political persuasion of professors in the social sciences, it's about 80% liberal. So although I've never seen a study asking people who study IQ who they voted for or who they donated to or what their political self-identification is, it's very likely the vast majority of people that study IQ that record and report those differences are liberals. Now, maybe they don't want to go on a podcast and with Charles Murray and talk about it because Murray has kind of made it a right-wing thing to say. But the vast majority, I'm quite sure, are not right-wing.
It's okay. Question from Lesson, please. A brief question, maybe, if possible, without a long introduction.
All right. So on Jordan Peterson. No.
Oh no.
I'm joking. I'm joking. All right.
He's joking. He's joking.
Yeah, I'm joking. So earlier you talked about how humanity is getting better, and the thing is, around the Western Hemisphere, we see that encroachments on freedoms, especially freedom of speech and introductions of blasphemy laws and all of that. So my question to both of you would be, how do you factor this in with what you said about humanity constantly getting better? And the other thing is, arguments pro-freedom have already been made, like by Voltaire, John Stuart Mill, and all of that. Why is that forgotten, and how can we reintroduce people to those ideas? Thank you.
Well, I think the short answer is, as I said, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. It's not a perfect, smooth, linear curve going upwards. And by the way, there's no there to get to. It's an asymptotic curve like this. We're always going to have to work at it. John Stuart Mill is still popular in college courses. His 1859 On Liberty has just been reprinted by the Heterodox Academy under just portions of the book. It's titled All Minus One. All Minus One. It's free. You can download it at the Heterodox Academy website. And it's beautifully illustrated, and it's the central points of why we should listen to what other people have to say. Based on Mill's famous, if all minus one believed one thing, we should still listen to that one person. We might be wrong, we might be partially wrong, we might be completely wrong. Even if we're right, we'll learn more about our arguments and make them better. He who knows only his own side of the argument doesn't even know that. You got to know what the other side's arguing and steelman or articulate their argument as good as they would, or even better, to the point where they would say, yes, that is exactly what I believe. And then you can demolish it. Anyway, so I think it's still out there. We just have to keep pushing and pushing and pushing back against those forces. They'll always be there.
Yeah.
Okay, the last question from this side, the last question.
Okay, for a long time, religions have tried to basically portray it as an allegory, with the truths being more read between the lines, and they don't. And lately, it's not even required that you actually believe in a God. The truths can be found by everyone, and oftentimes this has been criticized as giving false legitimacy to religion, and thereby extremism can foster more easily. But I've recently heard a point made that these attempts are actually quite good for the decline of religion, because, for example, the Anglican Church have declining numbers since the 1980s, and it has been very quickly declining, in fact, while other denominations have stayed pretty constant throughout the years. So maybe this attempt to make religion more intellectually flattering makes it have no selling value anymore and for the public, and actually this is good for the decline of religion. What are your thoughts on this second point?
Yeah.
Not sure there was a question there, but
no, whether or not these attempts to make religions more intellectual have more negative effects, like fostering extremism, or they actually help the decline of religion? As
yes,
you can
so you mean that sophisticated theologians who sort of waffle in a semi-incomprehensible way are killing their own church more effectively.
And we should be more welcoming of those kinds of people.
There's probably something in that, I think. And it's a remarkable fact that some of the most doctrinaire religions seem to be the ones that command loyalty. Religions that spout palpable nonsense seem to be the ones that people remain loyal to, or not only spout palpable nonsense, but also demand extremely uncomfortable rituals and discipline and forcing people to undergo unpleasant sacrifices and things like that. It's as though people almost like to be tortured in this kind of way. And it's always puzzled me, but I think maybe you've got a point. And anything that leads to the decline of religion is okay by me.
I rather like the idea of, almost like the idea of mandatory religious education of children. All of the religions, including Scientology, Mormonism, all the crazy stuff.
All for that.
Yeah.
As Dan Dennett said, the best way to get rid of religion is to make people read the Bible.
That's right.
Okay, is the last question from this side? Last question at all?
No, there should be another question from the other side. It was 4.
But he asked this is the last question from this side, and you have the last question.
Sorry. Okay. Well, good evening. Thank you for coming to Berlin. My question is kind of hard to phrase. I hope I get it right. There is a school of thought that is basically nihilism, sitting on the top of science as evolutionary biology and physics. And that school of thought basically says that the universe is deterministic, so there is no free will is just an illusion. It says that consciousness and feelings are nothing but an illusion either, because they're nothing but arbitrarily evolved neurochemical reactions. I don't know if you both subscribe to that school of thought. However, I think it must be understandable when people feel aggravated when they hear it. Because it basically, if you forgive the phrase, it invalidates their existence. And it says that the love that you have for your children and so forth is nothing but an illusion. Do you think that is a problem? And what do you make of it?
I was always taught by an Oxford tutor effectively to reach for my revolver when I hear the phrase nothing but. Nothing but an illusion. It may be an illusion, but it's a wonderful illusion. And consciousness may be an illusion, free will may be an illusion, but it's a very powerful illusion. It's one that we all have, and it's one of the things that makes life worth living.
Here.
Could I say something before we break for the book signing? And I haven't actually talked to Michael about this. I often, when it's a large audience, as this is, and there's potentially therefore a rather large queue for signing books, I feel it's unfair on people at the end of the line if we spend a lot of time dedicating books to particular individuals at the beginning of the line. And so I have always tried to make it a rule not to dedicate books personally when it's in a long line. I do it privately, and ditto with selfies. I wish I'd remembered to ask Michael how you feel about this.
I don't care. We'll see how it goes.
Well, that leaves it open.
Okay. No selfies at all.
Thank you again.
I'll follow your lead on that.
Michael and Richard.
Thank you.
And
thank you.
Thank you for the audience.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Richard. That was great. Really good. Thank you. 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 Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, you can show some support by subscribing to the podcast, sharing it with your friends, and leaving a review.